Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Hazrat Inayat Khan. The Alchemy of Happiness. The journey to the goal. When we picture life as a journey, there are 1,000 things which will prove it to be so. When we are on a journey, we are with a great many other people, looking at life and going forward. Those who have arrived at their station have got out of the train, and the little friendship or sympathy or antipathy that existed between us only lasted till then. Those who went on have left behind the impression of them, which we carry with us. That impression makes us either happy or unhappy, either it makes us love them even in their absence, or it makes us hate them, hoping that we shall never see them again. When we think of yesterday, of last week, of the last months, of the years that have passed in our lives, it only shows that they have passed and we have gone on. It is like the sensation that one has in the train, as though the train was standing still and the trees were moving. In life we have the same sensation, that life is passing and we are standing still. And we also see when traveling that some are prepared with all that is necessary in this world, while there are others who are not prepared. Both have to travel just the same, those who are prepared and those who are not. The only difference is that for those who are prepared, this journey is easy. This is explained by the Indian fable of the monkey and the sparrows. When autumn seemed to be approaching, the sparrows said, "We must have a nest. We must build it, and it must be ready soon, for autumn is coming nearer." A little monkey overheard this and was very frightened because it was the first time this young monkey had had to face the winter. It went with great anxiety to its parents and said, "We must build a home. We must build a nest where we can be protected. I did not know the autumn was coming, but someone told me so." While they were discussing this, the sparrows made their nest ready, but the monkeys put it off from one day to another until autumn was upon them. And so it is in the world. We find people who say, "What does it matter? We shall wait and see what will come." But when they are faced by a difficulty, by a need, then they begin to realize that it would have been better if they had been prepared. It is the same with education. A young person, when he should be learning, is always attracted to play and to the enjoyment of life. But when that golden age of childhood, which gives facilities for learning and for acquiring knowledge, is past, then it is too late. The greatest wealth is health, energy, intelligence, and life itself. If this health is not preserved and looked after in youth, then even though one may not feel it at that time, there will come a time when one realizes that one neglected it. I once asked a person who was old but strong and healthy, "Will you tell me what blessings you have, what it is that keeps you so strong and healthy at your age?" He said, "It is the conserved energy of youth which is now maintaining my life." Very few young people think about this. Youth is an intoxication. When they are in that intoxication, when they are full of energy, they do not think about it, of what they will have to spend in order to go far in the journey of life. And then we come to the idea of humanity. Today, what we consider learning or education consists of grammar and history and geography and mathematics. But that kind of education which we should possess is current coin. A good manner, strong will, a right attitude of mind, that kind of education seems to be quite overlooked. We find it nowhere, and yet if a man has education, qualification, rank or position, and lacks manner, he lacks a great part of life. If a man does not have that strength of mind which he needs to carry him along the whole of his life's path, he lacks a great deal. A man who lacks money misses little. But the man who lacks power of mind misses everything in life. Weakness develops, and it develops without his knowing it. When one sees a little spark of weakness in oneself, one thinks it is nothing, but one does not know that the spark will one day turn into a glow, and the glow will turn into a flame. For those who lack manner, strength of mind, a right attitude, it is then too late. They cannot be corrected anymore. The nature of life is such that a thoughtless life will draw one into thoughtlessness, and then thoughtlessness will draw even a thoughtful person towards itself. Therefore, there is more chance of falling than of rising in life. Besides, among thousands there is hardly one who goes upon this journey with open eyes, for nearly all journey with their eyes closed. Man depends so much upon his friends, upon his relations, upon those who love him, upon those who admire him. But he does not know that those who love him will demand from him what is missing. What is necessary in life is to master ourselves, and not to think that because we have influential or wealthy parents, it does not matter what we ourselves are like. Whatever relations we have, however great and good they may be, that is not of any use to us. We each have our journey to make, and we have to answer the demands of this journey. How wonderful it is to watch the people on the daily journeys we make. One person comes along in a group of travelers and gives pleasure to all. He shares with them and gives a good impression to all, and he wins their hearts. When he has gone, what he has left with his fellow travelers is joy, a beautiful impression which they will always keep. And there is another one who causes hurt or harm or produces some disturbance among those traveling with him. And when he has gone, they pray that they will never meet him again. One day a maid informed her mistress that there was a funeral passing along the street. She was much impressed and said, "Certainly the person who died went to heaven." Her mistress laughed at this maid's authoritative exclamation, that this dead person went to heaven. She said, "Did you see this dead person going to heaven?" "It is simple, madam," she said, for everyone who was following the funeral was weeping. Certainly this person has made a good impression on those among whom he lived. Man loses everything when absorbed in his daily life, not realizing that life passes, and the call comes before he even thinks of it. Man makes many great mistakes, but there is one principal one, and that is that he goes through life thinking that he will stay here forever. And since he is without preparation, the call naturally comes to him as a blow instead of as an invitation. When we think of the journey beyond, we begin to see how many there are in this world who do not even know that there is a hereafter. And the one who believes in the hereafter has his preconceived ideas about it. Either a religious or a philosophical belief. But not even that suffices for our purpose. What suffices for our purpose is to become acquainted with the road along which we have to pass, and with the road whereby the soul descended to the earth. This road is the bridge that stands between the physical and the spiritual part of our own being, and therefore the nature of this journey is different. The journey in the world we make outside ourselves. And it is by being acquainted with this road that we are led to that destination which we are meant to reach. It is this that is acquired as divine knowledge by the help of meditation. There are many in this world who are curious to know what we shall find beyond this life, and it is this curiosity which gives scope to those who wish to attract mankind by falsehood. It gives them the chance to make up stories to satisfy man's curiosity. For who can know of this way but man himself? He is the traveler and his own spirit is the way. It is man himself who must find his way, and it is with his own eyes that he must see what he will find on this way. Therefore the true teachers of life's secret do not tell him that he will see this or that on the way. They say he will find whatever he will find, and that his duty is to open his eyes, so that he may travel on the way and see for himself. Once a murid asked his teacher, "How I should like to see what it is like in heaven, and what hell looks like." "Close your eyes," said the teacher, "and you will see it." "Shall I see heaven first?" The teacher said, "Yes." He closed his eyes and went into meditation. "And now," said the teacher, "see hell also in meditation." And when the pupil opened his eyes, the teacher asked, "What did you see?" He said, "I saw nothing in heaven of that paradise of which people speak, nor were there those beautiful plants and flowers, and all the wonderful objects of comfort and luxury. There was nothing." "And what did you see in hell?" said the teacher. "I saw nothing. I had expected to see fire and brimstone and people in torture, but it was empty. What is the reason? Did I see or did I not see it?" And the teacher answered, "Certainly you have seen heaven and hell. But the brimstone and fire, or the beautiful gems and jewels of paradise, you have to take there yourself. You do not get them there." This gives us the secret of Omar Khayyam's saying, "Heaven is the vision of fulfilled desire. Hell is the shadow of the soul on fire." What is most necessary for us to learn and understand is that from a perfect source we come, and to a perfect goal we go. But few seek that source consciously, and fewer still seek that source rightly. What is the right way of seeking that source? The way to seek it is first to learn the psychology of one's own life. What makes one fall? What makes one rise? What makes one fail? What makes one succeed? What gives one happiness? What brings one sorrow? Then one should study the nature of pleasure and pain, whether it is a lasting pain, or whether it is a lasting pleasure, a momentary pleasure, or a momentary pain, and then find out the deceitful and false nature of one's own impressions, how under cover of pain there was pleasure, and how under cover of pleasure there was pain. How in the worst person there is some good to be found, and how in the best there is something bad to be traced. This widens the point of view of a man and prepares the ground of his heart to realize the secret of enjoyment. And the next thing man has to do is to control his activities, physical and mental. He should know that the nature of life is to go on, and that therefore this suspension of life gives scope to that tendency to progress within, instead of only giving it scope to progress outwardly. However much a person reads about and studies these things, it does not bring him satisfaction. Satisfaction comes only through experience, and experience is gained from meditation. There are two different stages in human evolution, the minor and the major stage. In the Hindu Puranic symbology, characters belonging to the one or the other of these stages are called the younger and the elder brother. Just as there is a stage of childhood when the child only knows what it wants and is only happy when it gets it, no matter what might be the consequences, so the minor stage of the soul is when man only desires what he can see, hear, perceive, or touch, when beyond that he does not care and does not wish for anything else. And the major stage is when man has experienced life to a certain extent, has known pleasure and pain, enthusiasm and disappointment, and has realized the variability of life. Only then has he reached the stage of majority. These minor and major stages do not depend upon a certain age, nor do they depend upon a particular education. They depend upon the inner life. When a man has penetrated into life as far as he can go, and when he has passed the limit of the minor stage, then he arrives at the major stage. In the East there is a custom that has become a kind of religious etiquette. Not to wake a person who is asleep. In other words, one should treat the world according to nature, and not go against nature. The man who is in the minor stage should not be forced into the major stage. He must first sleep well before he can awake. On the spiritual path, the man who is in the minor stage says, "Yes, I would like to go on this path, but where shall I arrive?" Before he travels on this path, he wants to know all about it. He wants to know whether his friends are going with him. And if they are not, he is not ready to go either. For he is not sure of the way. He will not go alone and wants to know when and where he will arrive, if it is safe to journey on that particular path. On his journey he looks back and at the same time tries to look forward, asking, "Shall I reach the goal? Is it really the right path?" 1,000 times doubt comes, or fear. He looks back, forward, around. If others could only tell him how far he has journeyed. He is restless. He wants to know how far he is from the goal. He really is still a child, although he has a desire to travel on. To him, the mystical hints for mental research are toys which keep him busy looking at the map of the journey to see where he is going. About the conditions of the major stage, the Bible says, "Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." If I were asked what the journey really is, and what its object, I would answer that the purpose of the whole of creation was for this journey, and that if it were not for this purpose, there would be no creation at all. Before a person starts upon this journey, he practices it in some form or other in play, although in reality he has not yet started. For instance, a person desires to be rich, and he devotes all his time and energy, his life and his thoughts, to that object, and so to speak journeys towards that goal. If he desires power, he makes for that and gets it. If he wants position, he uses all his strength to reach that goal. But he does all this in play. And the proof of this is that every time he attains the object he desired and of which he was in pursuit, it only gives him the desire for something else. If he is rich, he wants to be famous. If he is famous, he wants something else. If he has one thing, he strives for another and is never satisfied. It shows that man, outwardly busy in the pursuit of worldly things, is not satisfied, but has a constant yearning in his soul for something more. And this keeps him uneasy. Rumi gives a good explanation of this in his Masnavi, where he says, "What is it in the reed flute that appeals to your soul, that goes through you, pierces the heart?" And the answer is, it is the crying of the flute, and the reason of its crying is that it once belonged to a plant from which it was cut apart. Holes were made in its heart. It longs to be reunited with its source, with its origin. In another place in his book, Rumi says, "So it is with everyone who has left his original country for a long time. He may roam about and feel very pleased with what he sees, but there will come a moment when a strong yearning rises in his heart for the place where he was born." One sees that those in the world who have really suffered, who have been disappointed, who are broken-hearted, do not wish to tell anybody about their experiences. They do not want any company, but wish to be alone. And then it is as if there were someone waiting with open arms, waiting for such a soul to come as a child comes to its mother. This shows that there is somewhere a consoler greater than any in the world, a friend dearer than anyone else, a protector stronger than any earthly one. Knowing that the world is not to be depended upon, the one who has gone through all this looks for that great one in himself. The friend who is a friend in life and after death, in pleasure and pain, in riches and poverty, one upon whom one can always depend, who always guides rightly, who gives the best advice. That friend is hidden in one's own heart. One cannot find a better one. Who is this friend? Man's own being, his true inner being. That friend is the origin, source, and goal of all. But the question arises, if that friend is one's own being, why then call him a friend? Why not call him oneself? The answer is that no doubt this friend is really one's own being, but when the greater self is compared with the present realization, one finds oneself smaller than a drop in the ocean. Man cannot very well call that friend himself until he has forgotten himself, until he is no more himself. Until and unless one has arrived at the state of perfection, one had better be quiet and not insolent, talking about that which one has not yet become. All occult schools all over the world prescribe as the first lesson quietude, no discussion, no dispute, no argument. The conditions for those on the path are altogether different from the conditions of the outer world. The true knowers of life have kept their lips closed about this subject. No method has been successful and profitable other than the method of the prophets of all lands, who gave man the first lesson of love for God. Religious authorities of different times have kept humanity ignorant of the knowledge of God and have only given it a belief in God. And it is lack of this knowledge which has made the man of reason rebel against that which he could not understand. There remained no link between the two, knowledge and belief, and that is how the reign of materialism came to the world, a reign which is still spreading. At such times of materialism, chaos comes into the world. All is confusion and unrest. Many wish to do good, but do not know how. Such times Shri Krishna has called the decay of Dharma, when the spirit is gone and only the form remains. No doubt at times warning comes in the form of intuition to the soul, but the intoxication of life, the mist, is so great that the message is not heard, not understood, not received until the messenger has disappeared. What is the manner and the method of the journey? We see that when a person rises above all the things of the world, such as power, wealth, possessions, all that gives pride and vanity, there comes a desire in his heart, a remembrance of his origin, of the perfection of love and peace, although no one in the world can pretend to have arrived at this stage. Every moment of a man's life speaks louder of what he says than of what he really is. Man's first tendency towards humanity is a loving, a charitable attitude, to the extent that forgiveness dictates every action of his life. He shows patience in his actions, tolerance towards his fellow men, and considers that each one has his own stage of evolution. He does not expect a person to act in a better way than his stage of evolution permits. He does not make his own law wanting others to follow it. He follows the law for all. When a man's attitude has become a loving attitude, a tendency to serve, to forgive, to tolerate, to have reverence for all, good and bad, young and old, then he begins his journey. To explain what path it is, there is no better symbol than the cross. No one without courage, strength of will, and patience can follow this path. When a person has to live among people of every different kind, He must make his own character soft as a rose, make it even finer, so that no one can be hurt by the thorns. Two thorns cannot harm each other. The thorns can hurt the rose, but the rose cannot tear the thorns. Think what the life of the rose between two thorns must be. The journey begins with a path of thorns, and the traveler must go barefoot. It is not easy always to be tolerant and patient, to refrain from judging others, and to love one's enemy. It is a dead man who walks on this path, one who has drunk the bowl of poison. The beginning of each path is always difficult and uninteresting, hard for everybody. Ask the violinist about the first days when he practices scales and cannot even form the tones. Often he does not have enough patience to go on till he can play well enough to satisfy himself. The first part of the path is constant strife, struggle with life, but as one approaches the goal the path gets easier, the distance seems greater, but the path is smoother and difficulties less. The journey is achieved by realizing in oneself the answer to the questions. What am I? Am I body, mind, or what else? Do I originate from the earth, or if not, from whence? As soon as one has started on the journey, one's lower nature rises up, and all one's follies and weaknesses want to drag one down to earth. And the struggle of breaking these chains requires the strength of a Samson. Then comes the struggle between the beauty of matter and spiritual beauty. Beauty in form and color is more realistic. Spiritual beauty is hidden in mist until one comes to a stage when spiritual beauty becomes the beauty, which is a shining light. When man has acquired knowledge, power, magnetism, he becomes conscious of having greater power than others, of knowing more than others, of being able to achieve more than others. To use these faculties rightly is another struggle. He should not pride himself on these accomplishments. There is an enemy who starts with him on the journey and never leaves him. His pride and spiritual egotism, and this enemy stays with him as long as he is on the path. It is a great temptation to think, on having received inspiration and power, I can do, know, understand more than you. It is a constant struggle until the end, and at any moment one may stumble and fall down. Only the steadfast traveler will persist in rising up every time, for without patience he may lose his way. But those who journey on this path will get help. As Christ said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you." It is the goal which is important, and so is the right attitude of the soul towards it, not the things one meets on the path. Acknowledgement. What generally happens in life is this. Man acknowledges what he should not acknowledge, and he does not acknowledge what he should acknowledge. As a rule, it is best never to acknowledge a fact that one does not wish to give life to. For instance, when a person begins to see that his friend is not as kind, not as affectionate as he ought to be as a friend, as soon as he acknowledges it, he at once gives substance to something which so far has been only a shadow. A person who feels, everyone in my family, in my surroundings, dislikes me, disapproves of me, I have a tiring effect upon them, certainly gives life to that fact. Once a friend came to me and said, I do not know what bad planet is exerting its influence upon me, but for the last 3 years everything I touch has gone wrong. Nothing that I touch brings success or pleasure. I said, I am very sorry you have come so late. Yet it is not too late. But for 3 years you have added fuel to this fire. Then he asked, how did I add fuel to this fire? I answered, by acknowledging it. If we acknowledge every little fact that has a bad effect upon our life, we give it life from our own, and thus make it a living thing. And so it is with many illnesses. Very often people get into the habit of saying, "Oh, I am so tired." It is not necessary for them to cut wood or carry stones. They will be tired before doing it. No sooner do they think of tiredness than it is there. There are many cases in which there is no need to be tired. One becomes tired only by the fact of having acknowledged it. It is the same with sleeplessness. Once one acknowledges to oneself that one cannot sleep, that is enough to keep one awake all night. There are many illnesses of this kind, and chief among them is depression. To the one who acknowledges this life to be his friend, life will prove to be his friend. To the one who acknowledges this life to be his enemy, life will prove in every way to be his enemy. There are many who take notice of those who are working against them, and by taking notice they make them do it even more, because they make an impression upon them. One might ask if there does not exist any animosity in people if one does not think about it. It may exist, but by taking notice of it, by acknowledging it, one gives life to it. If one does not acknowledge it, it will die in time. For animosity is a fire, but not a perpetual fire. It is the acknowledging which gives fuel to the fire. If one does not acknowledge it, the fire will be extinguished. Many might say that it is hypocrisy not to acknowledge a fact. But that hypocrisy is better than the truth. In point of fact, one would not call it hypocrisy if one knew its meaning, its worth. The doctor who, even when he sees that his patient has a high fever, tells him, "It is all right, it is nothing," is not a hypocrite. By saying that there is a high fever, he will certainly increase the fever of the patient. And many doctors do so. Everything a physician or a religious man does to make a person who is on his deathbed think of death only encourages him towards death. He is pushing him towards death. One could prove a greater friend to someone who is on his deathbed by not acknowledging his trouble, his difficulty, his coming death. I have known cases in which, as soon as the doctor said that he had given up hope, the whole family began to talk about it to the patient, and his departure was hastened by many months. What should we acknowledge? That which we always escape from acknowledging, that is to say, our faults. By acknowledging our faults we shall kill them. But it is the one thing we want to hide that we want to keep hidden even from our own sight. To look one's own fault in the face is the best thing one can do. To analyze it, to weigh it, to measure it, and to understand it better. By this one either destroys it or understands it, or one turns the same fault into merit. Very often people think it is wise to say to someone, "No, you are not my friend. You have not been very attentive or kind to me." When a person tells another such things, he will inspire that person with them, even if they did not exist before. Besides, all misfortunes, all dangers that threaten and frighten man, are very often not as great as man thinks, and can be avoided if man did not acknowledge them. For how a person feels about the danger depends upon the particular pitch to which the heart is tuned. For instance, if 10 people were standing before the same danger and one could weigh their fear, one would find that each of them had a very different degree of fear. Once when the Prophet Muhammad and his followers were exiled, his enemies were pursuing them in the desert. They were standing behind a rock when suddenly the galloping of many horses was heard. "Oh, Prophet," said one of the disciples, "they are pursuing us. They are many, there is a whole army behind us." "Oh, they are going somewhere else," said the Prophet. "They will go in some other direction." "But what shall we do if they come here?" said the disciple. "They are so many, and we are only two." "Are we only two?" said the Prophet. "No, three. You, I, and God." Everyone does not look at danger from the same point of view. To one the smallest thing is too great, to another the greatest thing is nothing. It is according to how one views it. Once one sees the danger as being great, one will make it greater. But by not acknowledging the greatness of the danger, one will diminish it. When conditions have gone so far that it is most difficult to overcome the trouble, then one has to get them under control again. Yet by making a great fuss over it, we shall not make the trouble any less. On the contrary, it will become greater. There is an amusing story which explains this. Not long ago there was a prime minister of Hyderabad. He belonged to one of the ancient princely families who carried with them a certain ideal of manners and culture. Once when he was sitting at table entertaining some foreign friends, it happened that a part of the palace caught fire. As it was the custom not to come hurriedly when bringing any news, the aide-de-camp came very gently between the courses, and he whispered in his ear what was happening. To the great surprise of the aide-de-camp, the Prime Minister only said, "Yes," and went on with the next course which had arrived. And then when that was served, he asked his guests to excuse him and said, "I will come back in a moment." Quietly he went, as if nothing had happened, giving orders what to do to extinguish the fire, and then came back quietly. A great part of the palace had already burned, but the guests left without having noticed anything. Next day they read in the paper about the fire. They were very surprised to see such a thing, such patience, such self-control, such mastery. It did not mean that the minister did not feel the loss. He felt it perhaps more than anyone else could have felt it, but he did not show it. It was not his way to jump up and make a fuss for nothing. Suppose he had done as everyone does, what would he have achieved? He would have excited the others also, and made things worse. It was better that the palace should be on fire than the spirit. There is another thing that one should acknowledge. One should acknowledge in one's friend, in one's companion, in those one wishes to help, the good part in their character. By acknowledging it, by noticing it, one will fortify it, it will become greater. And do not think that it is against humility to acknowledge even one's own merits, for if one is unconscious of one's merits, the plant is suffering there without water. It does not mean that by acknowledging one's merit, one's virtue, one becomes proud or conceited. If one wants to, one can keep oneself free from pride or conceit. But by recognizing one's merit, one certainly waters the plant which is worth rearing. This same method can be extended from psychology to esotericism. In esotericism, we have a problem before us. There is a truth which we have to discover, which is obscured by a fact. And if we become accustomed to deny a fact in order to discover a truth, we will be ready then in esoteric work to discover that truth which is worth discovering. The fact is a shadow which for the moment represents something which has a certain meaning attached to it which we can witness, but which at the same time will not continue to be real forever. For instance, a person says, "Sando, in fact, is a strong man." Yes, it is a fact that he is a strong man, but because he will not be eternally strong, it is only a fact, it is not a truth. Therefore, the knowledge of the existence of others, all this knowledge that we have is a changeable knowledge, And since it is changeable, it is a fact, truth is behind it. But when we discover within our own self and in others that something which is everlasting and will never change, that is the truth. The one who understands this will understand the meaning of all the concentrations and meditations which are studied and practiced by the Sufis. They are all one means for one purpose. They are all in order to deny fact, in order to establish truth. Responsibility. In the Quran it is said that God offered his trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they refused, being unable to bear it, and then God offered his trust to man who did accept it. Trust in this case is responsibility. The value of man is as great as his responsibility, for what mountains cannot bear mankind has carried through life. And that is why a responsible man naturally shows a spiritual quality in all connections, in all relationships. Be he our friend or our master or servant or relative, if he is responsible for the trust we give him, it is that which gives him value. Be he a minister or a king or a president of the state, his greatness, his value, is according to his responsibility and according to the power with which he carries it out through life. But there is another point of view from which to look at it. That man may become great by his responsibility. And at the same time he may fall, for there is a stumbling block. The more conscious man becomes of his responsibility, the less he recognizes the power of wisdom which is working beside him. It is because of this that at this time of materialism there are great personalities who accomplish many things, and yet in the end they show their limitation. This limitation comes from being drowned in the responsibility they have taken upon themselves, and from having forgotten God, the other power that is working beside them. However great man may be in wisdom, in power, yet he is limited. And if his wisdom and power are compared with divine wisdom and power, they are not even as much as a drop compared with the sea. Sati, the Persian poet, has made a remark in his Rose Garden in simple words. He says, "The constructor of this whole universe is active in constructing even my affairs. But my anxiety about my affairs is my illness." By this he means, it is something I cannot help, but at the same time I recognize that all that I wish to accomplish is already done by someone else, who is far greater, more powerful and wise than I. Jalaluddin Rumi points out in his Masnavi that the smallest insect receives its proper nourishment. Either it is attracted to its nourishment or the nourishment is sent to it. Man, who is responsible for himself and who takes the responsibility upon himself for other living creatures, would never even think of the small insects living at the bottom of the wall of the house, under the earth, hidden under leaves, covered by grass. But they receive what is needed to keep them alive, and so birds and animals all receive their nourishment and everything they need to build their nests without the help of man. The unfortunate task falls upon man of toiling and of earning his living, but it is the price that he pays for self-reliance, for self-dependence, for the responsibility that he takes upon himself. Insofar as he takes a responsibility upon himself, he undoubtedly does a great work for humanity. But if he becomes so absorbed in that responsibility that he relies only upon his own limited resources, forgetting that source from whence his help comes, and if he is unaware of that power and wisdom which is beside him, then, no doubt, with his very great responsibility he will fail in the end, notwithstanding all the power and might he may have. When a man asks today if there is not an energy, a force, working which is devoid of wisdom, the answer is that there cannot exist a quality, an attribute, without the possessor of that quality, of that attribute. Energy cannot exist without the energetic, to whom energy belongs. Might cannot exist without the mighty one whose attribute it is. Intelligence cannot exist without the intelligent one to whom that intelligence belongs. And then a person may say, well, is it not energy, a force, a power from which all this comes? But he does not call himself energy, or force, or power. He says, I am an ego, a being. If this being is produced from an object, he cannot be a being. He should not claim himself to be a being. This shows that a being comes from a being, that there is a being behind it all. And that being is perfect in his power and wisdom. But then a person is inclined to wonder if that being is a larger being than himself, for his ego compares that being with himself. He wants to see that other being, how it stands in comparison with himself. And the answer to this is that it is a being that includes everyone and all things. And therefore there is nothing else that one can compare this being with, nor can it be explained, for neither is his wisdom like our wisdom nor his power like our limited power. Those who have tried to learn the life of dependence upon that being have been saints and sages. They have practiced a recognition of the divine power and of divine wisdom by becoming passive to it, by becoming responsive to it. And by this practice their load of responsibility was taken away from them, and their lives were made easy for them, and they experienced a great ease and peace. Very often a thoughtful man envies a little child who is so happy, without care, without anxieties. He realizes that the child represents the divine kingdom. It is as if all that is there belongs to it, all that is good and beautiful. But now the question arises as to how far one should depend upon divine power and wisdom, and how far one should feel responsible for oneself and for those who depend upon one. What sometimes happens is that man takes a principle and practices it. But in order to practice that principle, one must prepare oneself. If one is not prepared for that principle, one should not practice it. If a man who toils every day for his livelihood sits down and says that God must provide for his livelihood, the supply will not come so soon, and he will be disappointed. In order to practice it, he must first of all prepare himself to acquire faith. It is confidence and faith which will bring the supply. But confidence and faith should first be cultivated gradually, and the principle should not be practiced at once. If one has a business affair somewhere, and one says, well, it will all be done by itself, I shall not go there, that will be wrong, because that man has started by being responsible for it. He cannot suddenly take himself away like this. At the same time, he should practice every day that principle of recognizing the wisdom and power which is beside oneself. I would never advise anyone to give away one's responsibility in recognition of the might and wisdom of God. But one should be full of courage and confidence in the face of difficulty and seeming trouble, by recognizing that there is a mighty power, that there is a perfect wisdom behind one, and that all will be well. Through this a person will rise above his limited power and wisdom, and will be able to draw power and wisdom from that unlimited source, which in the end will lead him to success. Then even in the case of failure, this recognition of a perfect power and wisdom working beside oneself will give one the strength to bear it and to be resigned to the will of God. The continuity of life. There is a question which occupies every mind. Sooner or later a person begins to wonder whether there is such a thing as continuity of life. There are many who, in their pessimism, believe that there will be nothing afterwards, and there are others who, owing to their optimistic attitude, think that no matter whether it is true or not, it is just as well to believe that there is something. Nevertheless, it is most painful when a person thinks that there will be nothing after death, and however many reasons he may have in support of his belief, that belief is worse than death. There are some who wish by various phenomena to gain proof of life in the hereafter, but they meet with 99 disappointments and perhaps one reality. The idea of the Sufi is that life lives and that death dies. In other words, to life there is no death, and to death there is no life. But this way of attaining to the certainty that life is continuous is not only an intellectual one. For by studying all the philosophies and metaphysics all through his life, a man may prove to himself by reasoning that there is continuity of life. Yet this realization gained by effort of mind will still not give him the feeling of certainty which he would wish to have. The Sufi, therefore, practices the process by which he is able to touch that part of life in himself which is not subject to death, and by finding that part of life he naturally begins to feel the certainty of life. It makes him more certain of life than of anything else in the world, for he sees the changeability and limitation of all things. Everything that is constructed is subject to destruction. Everything that is compassed is subject to decomposition. Everything born is subject to death. In finding that life he finds his own self, and as that is the real life, everything else that he knows about life begins to lose its importance. In what way does he discover that life in him which was never born and will never die? By self-analysis, but a self-analysis according to what mystics know of it, which means the understanding of what this vehicle which we call our body is to us, and in what relation we stand to it. By understanding what the mind, that which we call mind, consists of. By asking oneself, am I, then, this body, am I this mind? There comes a time when man begins to see that he himself is the knower of the body and of the mind. But he only arrives at this realization when he can hold the body and mind in his hands, like objects which he uses for his purpose in life. Once he has done this, then the body and mind become like two floats which he puts on in order to swim in the water without danger of drowning. The same body and mind which cause man's mortality, at least in his thought, then become the means of his safety. They save him from drowning in the water of mortality. In point of fact, mortality is only our conception. Immortality is the reality. We make a conception of mortality because we do not know the real life. By realization of the real life and the comparison between real life and mortality, one learns that mortality is non-existent. It is no exaggeration to say that the work of a Sufi is unlearning. What he is accustomed to call or recognize as life, he then begins to recognize as death. And what he is accustomed to call death, he then begins to recognize as life. Thus for him both life and death are not conditions to which he is subject, but conditions which he himself brings about. A great Persian Sufi, Bedel, says, "By myself I become captive, and by myself I become free." In simple language this means, by myself I die, and by myself I live. Why does a Sufi say this? Why does not everyone say this? Because, for a Sufi, it is a condition which he brings about. For another person it is a condition in which he is helpless. To bring about this realization, the first thing that one must learn in every little thing in life is the way of unlearning. In my own work, I find it very difficult when a person comes to me and says, "Now I have learned so far. Will you add more to my knowledge?" In my heart I say, the more you have learned, the harder it is for me. And if I wanted to add to it, it would not be adding. It would be taking away from what you have, in order that I may unburden you from all you have learned. You must be able to unlearn first. For through this unlearning will come the true learning. But, one might say, is it then quite useless for us to learn what we learn in life? And the answer is no, it is all useful. But for what? For the object for which one has learned it. But not everything is learned on account of the object for which one is searching. When one is searching for the secret of life, the first thing to unlearn is that which one calls learning. No doubt this is something which is difficult for everyone to understand. And yet when we read the lives of Rumi and his teacher, Shams-I Tabriz, the first lesson the latter gave to Rumi was to unlearn all that he had learned. Is this unlearning forgetting all that one learns? Not at all. This unlearning means to be able to say with reason, logically, the contrary to what one has learned. When one is accustomed to say, "This is wrong, that is right. This is good and that is bad. This is great and that is small. This is higher and that is lower. This is spiritual and that is material. This is up and that is down, and this is before and that is after." If one can use the opposite words for each with reason and logic, one has unlearned naturally that which one had once learned. It is after this that the realization of truth begins. For then the mind is not fixed anymore. And it is then that one becomes alive, for then one's soul has been born. It is then that one will become tolerant, and it is then that one will forgive. For one will understand both one's friend and one's foe. Then one never has only one point of view. One has all points of view. Is it not dangerous, one might ask, to have all points of view? Wouldn't that make one lose one's own point of view? Not necessarily. One may occupy one room in the house or 10 rooms. One may use each as one likes according to how many points of view one can see, so large is one's point of view. All this is attained by the meditative process, by tuning oneself, by bringing oneself into a proper rhythm, by concentration, contemplation, meditation, and realization, by both dying and living at the same time. In order to rise above death, one must first die. In order to rise above mortality, one must know what it is. But this is certain, that the greatest and most important thing that one can wish to accomplish in life is one and only one: to rise above the conception of death. In order to rise above the conception of death, one should play death and try to know what death is. And it is a great lesson to play death. What we do is a very false thing, for we play life when we are subject to death. If we played death, it would be something real, and not a hypocrisy. It is through this that we shall discover life. For we experience death by playing life, and we experience life by playing death. What we call death is the death of this body. And if we attach ourselves to this body as our being, then it is death. A simple man asked a friend, "How shall I know that I am dead?" Well, the friend said, "It is very easy. When your coat has become torn and worn out, that is the sign of death." And when his coat was worn out and torn, this man began to think that he was dead, and he was weeping bitterly. Then some thoughtful person came along and told him, "It is only your coat that is torn. How can you cry? You are still alive." This story illustrates exactly the mystical idea. To the mystic, the body is a garment. But it is no use realizing this intellectually, for if one says intellectually, "My body is my garment," the next question is, "But then what am I, and where am I?" It is by the meditative process that one finds where one is and what one is, and this does not remain as a belief. It becomes faith, and even greater than faith, it becomes conviction. There was a king who thought that he would give up his kingdom and become a murid. He wanted to give up all worldly things and just lose himself in spiritual thought. And when he went to Bukhara, under the guidance of a teacher, the teacher gave him a probationer's work, and that work was to sweep and clean the whole house where all the pupils lived, and to collect the garbage and take it out of the village. No doubt the pupils were very much in sympathy with this man, and they were shocked that he, who used to sit on the throne and be a king, had to do this. They thought it must be a terrible thing for him. The teacher, knowing the object that he had before him, could not do otherwise. He said, he must do it, for he is not yet ready. Once all the disciples came and said, "Teacher, we are all in sympathy with this man, and we think he is so refined, so kind, and so cultured, and we would be so glad if you would relieve him of this duty." The teacher said, "We will have a test." One day when he was taking his garbage pail outside the town, somebody collided with him, and all was spilled on the ground. He looked up and said, "Well, this would not have happened in the past, that I can tell you." And when the report was brought to the teacher, he said, "Did I not say that the time had not yet come?" After some time a test was made again. And when the same thing happened, this man looked at the one who had pushed him and said nothing. Again the teacher said, "Did I not say that the time has not yet arrived?" But the third time when he was tested, he did not even look at the man who upset his pail. He gathered up everything that had been spilled and carried it along. Then the teacher said, "Now is the time, now he can play death." All the teachings of Christ, such as, "If one should strike you on one side of the face, turn the other side. If one should ask you to go 1 mile, go still farther. If one asks you for your overcoat, give your cap also." When we think of it, what does it all mean? Is it not all teaching us how to play death? Therefore, if at any time the teachers of truth have prescribed for their pupils any process of behavior towards their fellow men, that process can be called nothing else but playing death. One might think that this is very hard, that it is very cruel on the part of the teacher. But the instructor had also to go through the same cruelty at a certain period of his life. Sometimes the greatest cruelty is the greatest kindness. It is hard, but the hardest path can be conquered in this way. And how many times do we take to heart unnecessary things? How many times do we cause, or take interest in, disharmony which could just as well have been avoided? How often do we refrain from evil which we could just as well have refrained from? This is all playing life, and the other is playing death. When we play death, we arrive at life. When we play life, we arrive at death. Playing with death is rising above the sensible and the insensible, because what we call sensible and insensible belongs to a certain stage. One can rise above that stage, then all is sensible. Besides, one will always find that those who play death or who have played death are the ones who are the most open and sympathetic to the pain of others. For while they are playing death, automatically they are playing life too. That is why they are alive to everything that can help them to aid others, although they are dead to all the wrong things that come to them. What is the life of a mystic, of a man who has realized God, if it is not playing a part? The part is not one part, it is 1,000 parts. He has to play the part of a servant, of a master, of his parent's son, of a friend, of the father of his child, of a neighbor, and yet in his mind he realizes unity. In all capacities he goes on playing the part and yet keeping that feeling of oneness alive. The further one advances on the spiritual path, the more one will have to learn to play a part. The 12 apostles could suddenly speak many languages, and from that day they were able to play many parts and to answer the questions of everyone in his own language. The inspiration that came to them enabled them to play the part. If one wants to take part in the play produced before one, this can be accomplished by effacing oneself. One has to become separate from oneself, that is the whole secret. When one is no more what one thought oneself to be. Annihilation, which is such a frightening word, is in reality nothing but acting in a play with a different name, a different form, a different appearance. The annihilation of the self comes first by adoring another form or appearance. That annihilation never kills a person. It is Fana Fi Sheikh, and later come Fana Fi Rasul and Fana Fi Allah. These are the 3 steps on the path of annihilation. One step is annihilation in the ideal of form, the next in the ideal of name, and the third step is annihilation in the nameless and formless. And that's not all, our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.